Go ahead and get started. So let's start by setting a positive motivation for our time. So we think that the purpose of our being together is to study the Lamrim, the Buddha's sutra path, teachings on transforming ordinary mind into enlightened mind. So we generate, to whatever degree we can, a mind of confidence in those teachings through whatever level of understanding we have of the Buddha's qualities, his role as an unmistaken guide. And then we develop the wish to accomplish that path, those teachings, for not only our own benefit, but primarily to be of benefit. So we try to develop a broad altruistic motivation, wanting to attain the realizations of the path so that we are of greater benefit. All right. So with that, we will turn back to the material. Does anyone have a question from last week that wasn't addressed, or something that's come up on this topic? Nope. All right. So we are on the section still. We are on day 100 on the section on death and impermanence. As we mentioned, what Lama Zopa is doing now is breaking down the 9-point death meditation into its parts and giving us a closer look at the individual parts of the 9-point death meditation. So we looked at the first of those, which is that death is certain. That's what we did on day 99. That's where we ended. And now the kind of sub point that we're going to look at on day 100 is the quotation is, every second we get closer to death. So it gets even more cheery today. And so this is, interesting in a way, because the first sentence of the description, he says, there are many factors that can bring about premature death, but there is nothing that can add to our lifespan. And that's kind of an interesting idea that needs to be unpacked a little bit, because if we look at that from our perspective, we can think, well, premature death is something that I could hasten if I, eat, really terribly, or if I get addicted to drugs, or, if I ignore I never go to the doctor. There's things that I can do that would make things worse. So then on the flip side, we all think, well, if I do exercise and I do eat well and I do, my yearly annual checkups, and then I'm kind of doing all of the right things, and those two people, we could expect on average that statistically one group that's kind of doing the good things, and they're maybe going to live longer than the group that's, not doing any of the right kind of health promoting things. So that kind of seems like it argues against this perspective that there's nothing we can do to add. That's not what our doctor will tell us. Our doctor will tell us, well, if you quit smoking, you'll add years to your life. If you quit, you have a problem with alcohol, you quit your problem with alcohol, you'll certainly add some years to your life. But what Lama Zopa is talking about here is more so our karmically established upper limit to our lifespan. And that isn't something that there's really any real hope that we can do much about. So it is true that there are things we can do to make it to increase the probability of living out our karmically established upper limit of whatever lifespan that we have. But that established limit is what we were kind of born with. It's related to the karmas that ripened at the time of the previous death and that are responsible for this incarnation. So of course, we're not off the hook. We should still, take care of the body and, do things that support our health, in the hopes that we are creating cooperative causes and conditions to live out that karmically established lifespan. And also, it's not addressed here, but we've talked, not in this today's quotation, but we've talked in the past about how it's morality karma, ethical karma, that it kind of is related to that lifespan. So even though generally speaking, karma that we create in this life may not ripen in this life, we can't be sure. It's very strong karma can ripen within a single lifetime. That's uncommon, unlikely, but it isn't, it isn't prohibited. So, and also if we see the value of longer lifespans that are relatively free of hindrances, diseases, obstacles, then we also want to think, well, even if the karma that I'm creating in this lifetime isn't going to extend this lifetime, I'll be laying the foundation for future lives that are long and healthy and relatively free of extreme disease and whatnot. So that can encourage us to engage in virtue. Okay. So, like the other contemplations in the 9-point death meditation, although, I kind of joked that none of these are cheerful, in that sense, but the goal, as I've said, as we've discussed before, the goal of the 9-point death meditation isn't to be morbid about our mortality, but it is to help us to see the value and the necessity of really extracting the essence of however much time we do have. So because it's so easy, we've talked about the view of permanence, the sort of subconscious view of permanence that we have, where we find it difficult to sort of accept that we will die. Of course, we know it intellectually, we would say that to other people, but it's always something that's in the future. It's always, some distant date that never actually arrives in our minds. Unfortunately, in reality, it will arrive, and that disconnect is the problem. So with this contemplation, we're trying to kind of get directly at distractions. When the things that we get sucked into, where perhaps many hours might pass, you know, engaging in some sort of hobby or movies or entertainment, because we don't really see the value of each moment of our lives. But with this contemplation, we recognize that, well, when I slept last night, I can't. Those 8 hours, those are gone. That I'm now 8 hours closer to my death date than I was before. And when I watch that movie, for us, it's kind of like, well, I sort of suspended my day and did this fun thing, and now I'll do some practice. But that 2 hours, that we spent now, again, now we're 2 hours closer to the end of our lives. So it's kind of helping us to reflect on our choices and what we fill our days with, so that we make better choices, over time. We really begin to value every moment, every hour that we are alive and that we can practice, so that we turn away from wasting that time. We turn toward really making it beneficial. Now, of course, there are ways of, it isn't to say that everything that's not formal practice is useless. And, there are ways of, we might think, well, I value my spouse or my good friend, and so I want to deepen that relationship. And so, sure, I'll spend some time engaging in an activity to strengthen our bond, our friendship, in the hopes that we support each other and help help each other get through things, and kind of nurturing a support system. That's okay. It's just, so it isn't to say that that we're a failure if we engage in enjoyable activities, but it's kind of to think about why I'm doing things. What is the point? Is it just to escape? Does it serve a really useful purpose? And then to just sort of make wiser, better choices over time, because a lot of the choices that we make are kind of on autopilot. A lot of the times we just do things because that's what we grew up doing. That's what we spent 10 or 20 years kind of gravitating toward, and moving back in a different direction is going to take some effort, some intentionality. So if we can really become acutely aware of the passing of time, then that will support how we make decisions and what we choose to fill our days with. Yeah, and so, we talked before about how, from the Buddhist perspective, the principal cause of death is birth. It's not the specific disease that we get at a specific age. It's not the car accident. It is the momentary uh, changes that occur from the moment of our birth through to the moment of death. So this is also, I think, helping us to connect with subtle impermanence in that way, because we typically only associate with impermanence when there's a dramatic change, when we start to notice more and more gray hairs, we start to notice, that the body is creaking in ways that it didn't creak before, and things start to be a little bit more challenging than they were. But that process began at the moment of our birth. We think of toddlers as being, kind of frozen in that way, and people in their 80s and 90s are like frozen in that. But it's this continuous, unending progression that began at the moment of our birth and will continue until the moment of our death. So this is also going to help us to connect with how we're changing, and how there's less time between now and when things will be even more difficult, when our practice won't be as easy, when it will be more difficult to go on retreat and not sleep as much, and the retreat might not be in the best location, and the hardships that we have to put up with, that's going to increasingly become more of a challenge. So again, it's just about extracting as much as we can from all of the remaining time. Any thoughts or questions on that contemplation? All right. So then the next is that there's day 101. We are busy chasing the objects of our craving and desire, and there's no time to practice Dharma. So this is again one of the subpoints in the 9-point death meditation, that there's very little time, that the time that we do have is decreasing, and of that remaining time, very little of it is what we are likely to devote to spiritual practice. Because if we look at our past, as a child, as a young person, all of the things that took up all of our time, we have to recognize that a lot of that is still, happening. And so this is again about being reflective, being, honest with ourselves, and really thinking about what's an average day look like for me? What does an average week look like for me? How much day by day by day am I including really meaningful activities? And how much of it, and to what degree am I transforming other kinds of activities like work and so on? Because we can go to work with a bodhicitta motivation. It isn't that like it's only when we can get home from work that 45 minutes, like, that's practice and nothing else is practice. If we think about, well, I do need to eat food, and I do need to have, clean water and a roof over my head, and so I have a job to provide those things for me. But the real purpose of being at my job is the interactions that I have with other people, even if it's over the phone or it's via email, could be in person, um, to whatever degree, we're interacting with others. And so if we think about wanting all of those interactions to be of benefit, meaning thinking about our tone, thinking about our choice of words, going out of our way maybe to include ways of talking, and to be even more helpful than was called for in that moment, doing all of it with the goal of being useful to the other person, thinking about their needs, thinking it doesn't, and it doesn't matter what our job is. It doesn't matter if we sell clothing or we're a psychologist or, we work in a tire store. It doesn't matter. There are people in front of us who need things, and that's why they're there. And for them, they need that. It doesn't matter that it's a piece of clothing or if it's you know, a new car, or we don't know what they're going to use it for. We don't know how impactful that might be in their lives. To have someone take time and to really, walk them through things in a kind way that, it can improve their whole day. And then their day is better. And then other people's day is better because they have more space in their mind. And, so we can think about, and we can think about going, doing all of these things with that kind of motivation, going to the grocery store with that goal in mind, doing all of our, going to the post office with that goal in mind, visualizing, Buddhas above the heads of all of the people in the grocery store and reciting mantra as we shop for our groceries, and visualizing light rays and nectars filling the bodies and minds of all of the beings surrounding us in the grocery store, at the post office, and or in traffic, or um, so there's all kinds of things that we can do to transform activities that don't look like practice or that don't seem like practice. We can make them become part of our practice. And we really have to do that as much as we can, because to think about um, ordinary practices or formal practices being like, half an hour a day, that's not so powerful. But if we can think about 12 hours a day or 14 hours a day as being our practice, then that becomes incredibly um, useful and important. But, Lama Zopa is saying in order to do that, it is the case that we are under the influence, of attachment and craving, and so, like I said, we often kind of go on autopilot. We often kind of do things reflexively, out of a sense of self-soothing, um, and but the more awareness we can bring to that, the more wisdom we can bring to that, the more we can shift what has been true. Um, so, this is this contemplation. Lama Zopa is kind of being pretty stern here, and like I said, it's part of the 9-point death meditation. It's a traditional. It's not something that Lama Zopa particularly invented. When you do the 9-point death meditation, you contemplate how there's not much time for practice, but we can also try to think about, unlike the contemplation of extending our lifespan, that one we're stuck with, for the most part. This one is changeable. This one we can work with. We can, I mean, in terms of actual, sessions of meditation, actual, time spent reading Dharma books. Okay, that's and that's certainly an incredibly important part of our practice, and um, that aspect of it is more limited than other things. But when we internalize, or when we become familiar with what we are studying, what we are meditating on, then what is under our control, to one degree or another, and increasingly so over the decades, is putting that into practice outside of those hours spent meditating and spent, you know. And so, I mean, part of this too, in a way, is maybe cultural and monastic in the sense that, um, you know, in the 1400s and so on, the monks and nuns, they interacted with each other, but they didn't have real busy lives. And so, to them, you know, they were more so focused on thinking about actual sessions of meditation, actual time spent reading Dharma texts and so on, which is still critically important. But for us, you know, maybe we need to think about all of, you know, the other things that we do and how to make those meaningful, how to engage in those actions in a way that brings them onto our path. And then we, you know, can have a little bit more hopeful view of this particular contemplation where it isn't like, you know, but still recognizing that, you know, developing calm abiding, developing meditative insights, that is formal practice and that's critically important. So it isn't to say that it's all of one and none, it's not black and white, but maybe we can just try to incorporate a little bit wider perspective too. And at the same time, recognize that if I really do want to make real, you know, extreme progress, then yeah, formal practice is critically important. And um, I'm not doing a lot of that, you know, right now. I'm doing the best I can, but, you know, there isn't an unlimited amount of that left in my life. Any thoughts or questions? All right. So today, continuing on the kind of difficult quotation phase that we're in today, Lama Yeshe says on day 102, if we don't harness our mental energy, confusion will continue to rage through our mind and our life will be completely wasted. So that's tough. That's a strong statement from, you know, Lama Yeshe. We don't harness our mental energy, confusion will continue to rage through our mind and our life will be completely wasted. But then, of course, you know, he says, Dharma wisdom is always with us and makes us happy. Material things, the things we think our life depends upon, are unreliable. Sometimes with us, sometimes not. Psychologically, material possessions can become our worst enemy, he says. When we're dying and we have to leave them, we feel miserable. The more we have, the worse we feel. He says, therefore, we have to determine Dharma wisdom is the only solution to my problems, the only vehicle that can carry me to everlasting happiness. Only Dharma can truly save me from danger. So he isn't saying, you know, like Shakyamuni and all of, you know, they don't say, well, there's no choice. You know, there's isn't that you know, definitely we will suffer, or definitely, but it's kind of a warning that we're being given. If we continue to empower the minds of attachment, the minds of craving and grasping, and we kind of go down that materialistic route, then there's a danger. So Lama Yeshe is just, as we've said before, you know, all of these kind of harsh statements, they're being given to us by through the mind of compassion and love, wanting us to be happy, wanting us to be free of suffering, and trying to give us the tools to actually accomplish that. So this is kind of, just a kindly, stern warning that we need to pay attention to what we're energizing in our lives. What do we turn toward when we get stressed out? What do we turn toward when things feel overwhelming? Is it our practice, or do we take refuge in things that are external, that are unreliable, as Lama Yeshe says? And as Andi was saying, of course, we don't completely abandon conventional sources of refuge. When we have a headache, of course, we take Tylenol. If we need to see a doctor, of course, we see a doctor. But then we recognize, and when we're hungry, of course, we eat. But we recognize that external sources of refuge, like Lama Yeshe says, they're transitory, they're unreliable, even if they completely eliminate a particular ailment. For one, with food, we have to do it 3 or 4 times a day, every day, forever. So it's not something, it doesn't actually get rid of hunger, it just momentarily suppresses it. And that's really the same as all of these. Even if we suppress something like a cancer or what have you for the rest of our lives, and we're like, oh, we had a cancer scare and we went through chemo and whatnot, and we went into remission, we lived another 30 years, and we died peacefully in our sleep at 102. That's certainly better than having died of that terrible cancer at age 65, 70. But whatever treatment we did, it didn't get rid of the samsaric body, body's ability or proclivity for illness. So in our next life, we appropriate human aggregates again, perhaps, and now yet again subject to illness, subject to aging and sickness and death, just like we are in this life. So these external sources of refuge, they have varying degrees of utility, and no one's suggesting that we ignore them completely, but we need to recognize that their utility is limited, whereas the Dharma wisdom is the ultimate source of refuge, the real protection. That body of knowledge, those techniques, the path of the Lamrim, the path, the stages of the path, is what truly can put an end to suffering, not just for the remainder of one lifetime, but it can put an end to suffering forever, because we no longer appropriate samsaric aggregates that are subject to suffering. We move beyond what is subject to suffering. And that's all kind of Lama Yeshe is, saying, is that we, again, need to think about how much emphasis we're putting on external sources of refuge. And is it too much? Is it more than is called for? Are we exaggerating the benefit that we can receive from external sources of refuge? And therefore not making time and space for genuine refuge. Any thoughts or questions on that contemplation? Everyone's quiet today.